I'm Katie Grossman, the ultramarathon runner sponsored by New Balance. I'm also a creative professional, wife, and mom. Life has gotten crazy, especially after battling a tumor, but running still improves my life, both physically and mentally. Go beyond the run at newbalance.com.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
Hey ladies, I am jumping in before starting the intro and diving into today's very exciting episode with the one, the only Rene Mcgregor. Before I do so, I need to announce some things to you guys. Really important things, personal things, kind of, sort of, definitely. I am super excited to let you guys know that I am pregnant. Woo! At the time of this publishing, I'm like, I don't know, maybe 8 weeks pregnant or something like that. Math is hard, but it's definitely early. And I wanted to tell you guys because I'm actually telling you before I'm even posting this on my personal Instagram. People in my personal life don't usually listen to this podcast, I don't think. So yeah, but I feel really safe with you guys, telling you guys that. And I know that you will be pumped for me because you know what it's like to want something like that and to be going through HA and to eventually become pregnant is just such a huge deal. And as many of you guys know, I was not trying to get my period back to get pregnant. Of course, it was, a factor on the pros list to getting your period back was that becomes a possibility. But I, really pursued getting my period back for all of the reasons that I should have it other than having a baby. And I don't know, I was in therapy and my therapist was just so excited for me. She was like, this is everything that you've worked for. And so many other girls inside of the HA society have gotten their periods back too. And I know it can be really hard. Girls have gotten pregnant too. And I know that it's hard for girls who are trying to get their period back to get pregnant to hear about other women getting pregnant. But I know that you guys know that I am not one of those people that it was just easy for. No, not at all. And next week's episode is also a recovery story with another girl, Erica, from the HA Society, who got pregnant after having HA for a long time. And she talks us through her methodical approach to getting pregnant. It's something that when it happens in our community, it's just so worth celebrating because it just is just proof, that this can happen for all of us. So I wanted to share that with you guys early. And, if it's too early and things go wrong, I want you guys to be there for me as well. So that is why I'm sharing that with you today. Yeah. And then also next week on December 14th, what day of the week is that? That is Monday. On Monday, December 14th, the HA Society is reopening its doors. We have all kinds of women in there now. We have recovered women going through HA, of course. Obviously, that's who I created it for. And honestly, I can't believe how many recovered women, practitioners, and also girls that have just stayed after not only recovering but getting pregnant. I am overwhelmed by just the mix of girls that we have in that group that are just there to support. We get on community calls every week. If you miss those calls, I record them and upload them like little exclusive podcast episodes so you can listen back and just keep learning even if you can't make it to the calls. It's really awesome. I release all of the HA podcast episodes there in advance, unedited, uncut versions. And you can just chat with us on the message board. You can DM with me directly. That is the only place where I will give direct support. I can no longer manage that kind of thing in the DMs, but Of course, if you have a question there, come and message me. But if you want to get community support from people like me, if you want to join on the calls and chat face to face, come to the HA Society. The waitlist link is in the show notes. You can just go to waitlist.thehasociety.com or over to the Instagram. The link is in a bunch of places, so you can find the waitlist there, and I'll email you personally when it is open so you can come on in. And then finally, I just want to remind you guys that Ashley and I are still taking on HA coaching clients. We are having so much fun basically doing HA life coaching. I don't know, imagine you were on like a podcast episode call with me like this every single week, and we just work through whatever the heck you're going through that week. I offer a 15-minute free call so we can see if coaching is the right fit for you and maybe answer any questions that you may have before deciding. And if we're not a fit for you, I'll also have a recommendation for another practitioner that you can work with. So do not hesitate. Okay, that was a lot of stuff, guys. Join the waitlist or book a 15-minute call, whatever works for you. And I'll see you on December 14th when the doors to the society open. Okay, enjoy this episode with Rene McGregor. Hey, and welcome to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast, an adulting advice podcast production. I'm Dani Sheriff, and this is the place to come if you care about getting your period regularly. This podcast aims to educate, inform, and keep you motivated on your period and HA recovery track. And quick disclaimer, guys, I'm not a doctor, and none of the information in this podcast is intended to replace. Hey guys, before we jump into this episode with Rene McGregor, I just want to give you a heads up that the audio for this clip was not super awesome. I had to record it through Zoom and something was just happening up with the connection, and also I was just being a total weirdo at the very beginning and I had my microphone way too close to my face. Like I think I'm a rock star or something. I'm right up on my microphone. So I apologize for that. And this episode's totally fine. The audio just sounds a little more like AM radio. So a bit of a flashback to like being at your grandparents' house and listening to AM radio or something like that. So I hope you enjoy. Either way, it's going to be fantastic because it's Rene McGregor. She gives us so much amazing information. So I appreciate you bearing with us for that and enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast, the hardest podcast on the internet to say. It's me here, Dani, and I am joined by a much requested guest that I'm super excited to be bringing to you. This is Rene McGregor, and Rene is a leading sports and eating disorder specialist dietitian. She has 20 years experience working in clinical and performance nutrition. This includes Olympic and Paralympic athletes and Commonwealth Games athletes. She works with individuals and athletes of all levels and ages. She coaches. Oh, you also work with coaches and you provide nutritional strategies to enhance sport performance and manage eating disorders. If y'all can't tell, I'm reading this introduction directly from her website because it's just way better than what I would be able to come up with myself. Rene is presently working with a number of national governing bodies, including Scottish Gymnastics, the Great British 24-Hour Running Squad, and the English Ballet Company. She's regularly asked to work directly with high-performing and professional athletes and has developed athletes that have developed a dysfunctional relationship with food that is impacting their performance, health, and career. She's the best-selling author of Training Food, Fast Fuel Books, and Orthorexia, When Healthy Eating Goes Bad. Let me say that again. She's the best-selling author of Training Food, Fast Fuel Books, and the book Orthorexia, When Healthy Eating Goes Bad. She's the co-founder of #TrainBrave, a campaign raising the awareness of eating disorders in sport, providing resources and practical strategies to reduce the prevalence of eating disorders in sport. And she's on the Red S Advisory Board for BASES, which is the British Association for Sport and Exercise Science. And she sits on the International Task Force for Orthorexia.
Oh,
always feel really embarrassed. Thank you. It's always like when she does this, and it's like,
oh my God.
Really, I'm just a normal human being that does her job.
Well, that's what happens when you've just been doing it for 20 years, right? You just like accumulate these things. I have literally never read anyone's intro. I usually get them to introduce themselves, but I just figured you'd forget to say half of this stuff.
I would have just said, I'm Rene McGregor and I'm a sports dietitian and here I am. And that would have been pretty much it. So
I know. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. Well, welcome. I'm so honored to have you here.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here from my kitchen table. And I've just warned you guys, if you hear strange noises, I have a dog and he has a tendency whenever I'm doing something like this to just go nuts for half an hour. So I will try to keep him calm. He's sat under the table at the moment, but let's see what happens. But I think he just wants to be part of it all, to be honest.
Oh, all good. Well, what's your dog's name?
He's called Bailey.
Bailey. Well, if y'all hear Bailey in the background, it happens to the best of us. It's totally fine. So, Rene, on this podcast, I speak to all kinds of practitioners and professionals to help women with HA understand not just what's happening in their bodies, but what approach or even what type of professional might be right for them. It's been requested many, many times for me to try and get you on the show, and here you are, and the listeners are very excited. So I just really appreciate you coming on and giving people an idea of just from your experience and your perspective.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolute pleasure. I think it's a very misunderstood and under-discussed topic. So I'm really pleased to be raising awareness about it. And if I can help people in the process, then that's great.
Yeah, thanks. And that just makes me think as well. It's been coming up for me that some people think it's also a lot more complex as like a medical condition or disease than I personally think it really is. So like a lot of people or health coaches are afraid to kind of talk about it. But that sort of feels so strange to me, because it's like those same people are not afraid to talk about like pregnancy tips, or not afraid to talk about like weight loss tips or performance tips, but they're afraid to talk about HA and getting your period back. And I kind of feel like it all needs to be hand in hand and all needs to be in the same conversation. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think hypothalamic amenorrhea is a medical condition. It can happen for a number of reasons. But I think the problem is, particularly in I suppose the area I work in, which is mainly individuals who are very, very sporty, it's almost seen as accepted. And so then people don't want to question it or discuss it or look into it. But it shouldn't be accepted. It's never okay for a woman to not have a period. Never. Unless they're pregnant or breastfeeding, obviously. Right. But from a medical point of view, there should never really be a reason why you don't have a period. So I think, like, from my point of view, it's helping people to understand, well, why is it happening for me? Because everybody's going to be different, like it can be for different reasons. And it's like, it's not, again, what people automatically assume, that, you have to have lost a lot of weight, or that there's been some major changes to your diet. It could be these things, but it could be so many different things. And I think it's helping people to realize that, your hormonal system is so, so critical to your overall health. Because that's the other thing I think is often misunderstood, is that when we think about the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which controls all our hormones, and all our hormones basically control every single biological process going on through our body, right? So if you don't have a period, that would mean that you're obviously switching off your reproductive hormones for some reason. But that then also has an impact on your other hormones, like oxytocin, like growth hormone. And then this has another effect on whether you perform well, whether you adapt to your training, whether you have your mental health, so they're all interacting. And I think that's the thing, is that one of the things that slightly annoys me about science and medicine as well is that everybody tends to have their own specialist area, and it's just fixating on that one thing. And really, I'm not saying you can be an expert in everything, because you can't, and I'm not either. But you should understand how to join the dots at least, and then know how to signpost and where to signpost to.
Okay. I appreciate that take. That's awesome. So I want to dive into some of the questions that I have lined up for you today. And I mean, let's just get ahead with it. I know that you are very experienced and you have a lot of accolades, and perhaps you're one of the most respected voices in the HA women who exercise a lot area, which is probably pretty crazy because that's just like such a huge area, and there's like not that many voices in it, and you're one of the biggest voices. So that must feel kind of surreal sometimes. But do you have your own history with this kind of situation or condition?
Yeah, I mean, mine it's not quite as I suppose it's not as straightforward, in the sense that I did have an eating disorder when I was a teenager, and I was 13, so I basically got my period when I was 13 and a half, like kind of fairly bog standard for most teenagers. I only had 2, and then I got very sick, basically. And so for 5 years, so until I was 18, I didn't have a period at all. And I was getting help. I was getting some support. But, an eating disorder is a very complex problem. And I probably didn't get the right support. Now that I know what I do with people, I probably didn't get the right support. But at 18, I was obviously just on my way off to uni, and still didn't have a period. But also, because of my history, I did have quite a forward-thinking GP who at that stage was really worried about my bone health, because it'd been 5 years of not having a period, and through my kind of critical years, adolescent years, where you'd be putting down your bone density, really. So he decided to do a DEXA scan, a bone scan on me, and let's say my Z score. So we do Z scores because it's age matched, so it helps to see where you fit in with the rest of the people your age. Let's say my Z scores were really bad. Like, I had osteoporosis in my spine and I had osteoporosis in my hip, which at 18 is not ideal, really. So at that stage, and we have to remember, I'm a lot older than probably most people listening to this podcast. At that stage, the treatment at that point was, oh, we'll put you on the contraceptive pill because we're giving you some estrogen, so that will protect your bones moving forward. So I just went on the pill because that's what you do, right? You do what you're told. I went off to uni, did my first degree, then did a second degree, and finally, I suppose I was 20, I think now, 23. By the time I got into my first job, I was 23. And I then met my now ex-husband, but I met him when I was 24. And I think it was around probably the age of 26, I was starting to get some really bad headaches and like really bad migraines. And at that stage, they were sort of saying, if you have migraines and there's a family history of DVTs, you shouldn't be on the pill. So I went to my doctor and they said, okay, yeah, you're going to have to come off the pill because obviously it's a problem for you. So I guess maybe I was a bit stupid and probably irresponsible, but I just assumed, because I hadn't had a period since I was 13 at this stage, well, it'd be fine. Nothing will happen. And, my ex-husband and I had the conversation and we're like, yeah, we'll be careful. But obviously, if it does happen, it's fine. But it's unlikely it'll happen because it never happens, especially when you just come off the pill. It's all fine. Mm. And I felt pregnant straight away. So I obviously did ovulate in that initial few weeks when I came off the pill. Mm. But again, so you've got to remember, it's like 13 years later after I'd had my first period. So my story is quite unusual because the thing is, I didn't realize that I could at that point because they'd been so long. And I did fall pregnant and I had my first daughter who, is brilliant. And I have no regrets about having her at all. And And then actually I then breastfed, so I didn't get my period back again. And then I fell pregnant again. So what I'm trying to get at is actually by the time I finally got my period back, I was probably 29.
That's so weird.
Yeah. So what I'm saying, I don't think people talk about this at all, because I get a lot of women that come to me who say, I've been off the pill for several years, I really want a baby, and what should I do, and everything. And mine was such an unusual story in the sense that obviously during my time as in my 20s, when I was back working, and I definitely I was restored, I was well, like I wasn't underweight. Obviously it was enough to have restored my hormones, but that's the thing about the pill, right? You never know. You don't know what's going on underneath it all.
Yeah.
So this is why I suppose, it's difficult. It can disguise so much. But yeah, I think it's really important for people to realize that you can be completely fertile even when you're on the pill and come off, and it happens straight away.
Totally. There's basically like every case example has happened. And I run this, like I have a community called the HA Society where we just get together and support. One of the girls most recently, she has just been desperate to get her period back. And instead of it ever coming, she just got pregnant straight away. And I mean, this just happens more often than we realize. And it's also just such a testament to how resilient our bodies are and how much they do want to ovulate. Like it's always trying to make it happen as long as you give it the environment it needs, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I also want to give people that hope as well, because I know so many women do worry that being on the pill means that they might not be able to have children, or they won't know they can have children. And obviously we don't know, but in a lot of cases it's completely fine. And also that this post-pill amenorrhea is not a thing, because a lot of people will go back to the doctors and say, oh, well, I've been off the pill now 6 months and I still haven't had a period, and the doctors might turn around and say, we've heard it a lot in our clinic, oh, it's fine because it's still early days. There is no such thing as a
no, it should come back, and if it doesn't, there's right. Exactly. So it should come back, and if it doesn't, there's a different problem underlying this issue.
Yeah.
And really your pill is just masking what's actually happening in your menstruation.
Exactly.
Love it. So interesting. So question number 2 for you. I am careful to tell women that they can work out and still get a period. However, I do kind of err on the side of like we were just saying, there's an example of every situation. And there's definitely people where it does happen. And the question I get the most, and I bet you do too, is can I keep working out? Can I please still work out? How much training can I do? How much do I really need to reduce? That kind of thing. Do you see any patterns or correlations amongst the women who are able to continue with some sort of movement and still get their period back, and the women that need to take like full rest?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do I see a correlation? I'm not sure about correlation, but I think every case is different, and that's the bit that's really important. So you can't say, oh, it's okay to train, because for some women it isn't. Mm-hmm. And from my point of view, the way we would make that decision would be based on a series of blood tests, so looking at hormonal markers, but also getting the full clinical picture, like what has happened to this person, what has been going on with her, how much training has she always done, how much training has she done recently, what does her food intake look like, is she doing fasted training, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think I can say yes or no, but what I will say is, as much as possible, we would try not to stop someone from doing any training. I know there's a whole all-in method, and I don't think that's necessary for everybody. In some cases it might be, but I think in the majority of cases I have worked in, we haven't needed to go as far as that. There are, however, some sports that I think probably do need to be stopped, and it's really difficult. So I definitely see that running in particular seems to cause a lot of stress to the body and seems to be the one sport that most women will need to stop in order to get their period back. It's very difficult to, I think it's, I mean, I'm a runner, so I know it's very, very difficult to reduce the intensity down, you know, because once you start running, most of us have like a running pace or a running kind of, I suppose, running state that is kind of comfortable for us. And although that's comfortable for us, it might still be too much in terms of creating stress in the body and meaning that your HPA axis is going to still stay shut down. So as much as possible, I try not to stop people, but there are going to be certain situations where we do have to. And in those cases, we'll always try and provide them with an alternative. So obviously, one of the things we know is that when people have HA, estrogen levels are going to be quite low, which also has a negative impact on your bone health. So one thing that we do encourage people to do is strength training, but not like big hit stuff, not like, you know, low weights, high rep, not that kind of thing, but much more higher weights, lower rep, lots of rest. But that's really, really good, not just for bone health, but also for neuromuscular control, which is going to help you in your sport, whatever you're going to do moving forward. So, like I said, every case is different. The intensity of training seems to be the critical thing. And knowing how to manage that is going to depend on where your psyche is in comparison to, you know, why do you train? What's the reason behind your training? How does it serve you? And, you know, I think if you can, it's again, it goes back to basically doing a full assessment of someone and working out, are they able to tame this, or are they such an obsessive nature that that's just not going to be possible? And you know, and that's the reality of it.
I have so many questions right now about where to start with this. Okay, so when you say it's this like individual approach, you have to look at what everyone's doing. And let's take that example where, say, because this is also what happened to me. I wasn't a runner. I've never run a day in my life, but I did a lot of weightlifting, and a week with the high intent, like not high intensity, so that like heavier weights, lower reps, but quite a number of sets across a training session. So you would recommend to many people, I suppose, like, let's change it up, let's do some strength training. But to someone who lost their period doing strength training, I assume would have a different approach to that, maybe just like less of the strength training, or what? How does that look for athletes?
So again, it depends on, a lot of it will depend on also, don't forget, the fueling around the training. Mm-hmm. So yes, we've had lots of women who have come in with amenorrhea who've done strength training, but they've also done fasted strength training, or they've gone keto, or they've not recovered properly immediately after their training. Like, it's not, and that's what I mean. It's not just about training. It's not just about calories in, calories out. It's so specific for the individual. And that's why, like, you know, often if I put a Q&A box out on Instagram, the question I'll get asked again and again and again and again is, how do I get my period back? So I don't know. I can't tell you, because I need to know you. I need to know what's going on for you. You know, it is. And that's also why I do get quite frustrated, because there are a lot of people who are not qualified putting information about how to get your period back from HA, and like how to recover from HA, and they maybe using their own personal journey, their own personal experience, which is fine. Obviously, we all have our own personal journey, but you have to understand, like I said right at the beginning, how it all interacts. You know, it's all very well saying, well, you need to eat 2,500 calories. Well, actually, for some women, that's not what it's about. It's about something completely different. For some women, it's not about they have to hit a certain weight. It might be that they actually have to hit a certain body fat percentage. Like, you know, a study recently showed that most women need to be a minimum, and it's a minimum of 21% body fat in order for their periods to return. Minimum. So that could mean that you're somebody genetically who actually needs to be more like 25 or 26%. but we don't have the numbers. We don't know, because everybody is so unique. And that's the other thing is, they say, oh yeah, but my friend, they do this and they do that and they still got a period. And it's like, well, yeah, but why are you comparing yourself to your friend? Because your genetics, your background, your ethnicity, your lifestyle is very different to theirs. And you can't compare. You can't.
I love it. I appreciate everything that you just said, and I completely agree. And let's talk a little bit about those different reasons you were talking about. Yes, it's not just as simple for many people. Sometimes it is just as simple as hitting 2,500 calories, and that's more just because it's that person was probably in a straight calorie deficit, or they got lucky and increased their calories with something they were nutrient deficient in, or the blah, blah. But what are those other factors that you're talking about?
So when we look at somebody who has HA, often we can tell from the blood test results what's the possible cause, right? And often you can tell if the sort of the controlling hormones are really flatlined, then that would probably suggest that somebody's in very, very low energy availability and probably very low in weight, to be honest. Sometimes only luteinizing hormone is very low. And if luteinizing hormone is very low, then that would again indicate that this individual is probably doing too much training. So this is what I mean. You have to do a full assessment of everything. And so it's and that's what I mean. It goes back to having the clinical knowledge, having the clinical understanding of what is it that these tests are telling us, as well as doing the full history. And I think this is where often women get so frustrated, because they'll go to a gynecologist, or they'll go to a doctor or whatever, and they'll say, look, I haven't got a period. I haven't had one since I came off the pill. They might look okay physically because they're not underweight, and the doctor will go, oh, you've got PCOS, without really looking at or doing a full history of, well, actually, when was the last time you had a period, and what has changed since then? And have you always been this weight, or have you lost weight even, you have to look at everything. So the weight is one indicator, training load and training intensity is another indicator. Energy availability obviously is a key one. Carbohydrate availability particularly is a critical one, which a lot of women are so fearful of. Body composition is another one. So there's so many things. And then also looking at the kind of general trend and history of what has been going on for this person.
Okay. And when you talk about the body composition / body fat availability, do you know what it is about body fat that's important?
So again, we have another hormone in our body fat called leptin. And generally speaking, in a person who has no issues with HA or no issues with energy availability or anything like that, what normally happens is that when we're hungry, so after several hours of not eating, the body will realize that it needs food, and it will increase your level of ghrelin, which is your appetite hormone. So it tells us that we're hungry, and when ghrelin is high, leptin will be low. Okay, and that basically is saying it feeds back, and that's the beautiful thing about hormones. They have these beautiful feedback loops, and it will feed back to the hypothalamus saying, there's not enough energy in this body, I need food, which is why all these levels are going up and down. And as soon as you then feed your body, ghrelin goes down, leptin goes back up, and we have equilibrium. We have balance, and everything goes back to normal until the next time. So we have this lovely kind of cycle that works for us. Now, if somebody has gone down the path of severe restriction,
check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
Some read self-help books, others use meditation. At New Balance, it's believed that peace can be found with a run. You're never truly prepared for adversity, but certain things serve as a guide for moving forward. Whether sprinting or running marathons, the physical and mental requirements become ingrained. Visualizing an outcome, synchronizing breath and body, pushing past pain and fatigue. Those hard-learned lessons serve as a blueprint for overcoming obstacles and achieving balance in life. Go beyond the run at newbalance.com.
Or has lost a lot of weight, often leptin will drop at the same time. And so when leptin is very, very low, it will constantly be pumping out that signal that there's not enough energy here, there's not enough energy here, there's not enough energy here. And it can take quite a long time and quite a lot of energy before leptin goes back to normal. And leptin seems to be the limiting factor in when someone's period comes back.
Oh.
So it's quite a critical hormone. And the problem you'll see is that, especially like when you're working with somebody who's been very restrictive or who has lost quite a lot of weight, is that if they're not consistent with their approach, and this is really important, because what often happens is people will get to a certain point where they're like, okay, I'm comfortable here. This is where I want to stop. I don't want to go any further in terms of my weight, in terms of my body composition. And they may start to pull back again. They may start to restrict a little bit, not much, but a little bit. They've never let their body completely overcome that threat of starvation. And so leptin never quite goes back. And that will be literally the limiting factor for most women in terms of whether their period comes back or not comes back. Because it's all, I say that, I mean, it's all connected. They're all the hormones are moving up and down at the same time. But the leptin does seem to be quite an important factor in terms of when. So this is why previously we were told we need fat for our hormones, because leptin is found in our body fat. It's kind of, we don't need fat for our hormones. We need carbohydrate for our hormones,
Okay.
but we need a certain amount of body fat in order for our hormones to all work efficiently. And we need the body to know that the threat of starvation has disappeared in order for that to go up.
So this is kind of where the whole like throw it all at the wall, 250 calories all in method, sort of like, that's where the logic for that comes from, right? Like eat a lot of everything, so you're getting all the macronutrients, so that you're basically getting body fat, getting carbs, getting healthy fats, and increasing your luteinizing hormone or like increase,
FSH and LH,
to put it in like my very layman's terms. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have some more questions on the nutrition side of things. So, and you've already touched on a bit of it, but if we were to think about macronutrient intake, so carbs, proteins, and fats, do you notice that a particular macronutrient is undereaten in general by women? Like you're saying carbs are super important, fats are super important. For me, I was very low on fats and very high on carbs because I was like working with a nutrition coach and doing sports. So they were like, I had plenty of carbs. So for me, so there's like I assume there's two different camps of people, low fat, low carb. And like, what's your experience been with working with women there? And what are you seeing as the prominent issue?
The prominent issue, if I'm being completely honest, Dani, from my point of view, from what I've seen in my clinic, has been fasted training.
Oh, okay.
From that, it has been the biggest reason why people's periods haven't come back.
Can you define fasted training for us?
So basically, when somebody does, usually it's first thing in the morning. That's what we're noticing is first thing in the morning, early morning, without any fuel at all in the system. Nothing. And even if they're having like a handful of nuts or something, it's not. It does seem to be that carbohydrate availability first thing in the morning seems to be very, very critical in terms of ensuring that hormones work properly. And if you go way back, like if you look at the studies, I think it was quite a long time ago now, but it was like 86. but it may have been 89. But there's a study from, it's called the Vermont study, and it looks at the role of carbohydrate, particularly in the HPA axis. And what they found was when carbohydrate intake was low, then the HPA axis didn't work very well, and your T3, so your one of your thyroid hormones, was very, very low. And when that's low, then everything's down-regulated. So the body goes into preservation mode. It goes into shutdown. Like, a bit like your phone, you know, like when your battery is on 20% and it starts to shut everything down. It's like that. So we know, and obviously, yes, there's not been any recent studies on this, but, you know, physiology of the body is not going to change in 20, 30 years. Like, that is the physiology of the body. That's how it works. So we know that carbohydrate availability is very, very critical for the correct functioning of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which obviously, as we said at the beginning, controls all our hormones. So from my point of view, yes, many, many women are fearful of carbs. Many, like I would say over half are not eating enough carbs. The other thing that I find fascinating, and maybe you've seen this too, is that since the rise of the plant-based diet, more and more people are using vegetables and beans and pulses as their carb option, because we're told they're carbs, so it's fine. Except, again, when you look at nutrition and you look at what vegetables are, yes, they contain starchy carbohydrate, but they mainly contain cellulose, right? Plant wool, which is not digestible. So you don't get any actual carbohydrate from it. So a lot of it is insoluble, you know, it's a lot of fiber, you don't digest it. So you kid yourself. If you have a piece of steak and your vegetable, let's not say steak because it's plant-based, so that would be wrong. But, you know, you have your chickpeas and your vegetables, or whatever it might be, your tofu and your vegetables. A lot of people have, like, you know, tofu and vegetables. They think they've ticked all their boxes, and then, well, I'm eating enough, like, I've got carbs here. But they haven't. And this is where another thing, big trend I'm seeing. I'm not saying you shouldn't be plant-based. I'm not saying that for 1 second. I'm saying you just have to be really mindful that you don't displace actual complex carbs like rice and pasta and bread and oats and potatoes and couscous. I remember them all. You know, you don't displace those with vegetables, because we definitely see it. And the thing about also, the other thing about the plant-based diet is it's a very voluminous diet, right? It's very, very filling. And so again, you then don't quite hit your numbers, especially if you're doing a lot of training. So to answer your question, do I see fat? Do I see carb? I mean, it's a mixture. Like you said, it's again, there's no one absolute. But the things that we're noticing are definitely fasted training is a no-no. Definitely the timing of your nutrition around your training is really, really significant. And also being mindful of where your source of carbs actually comes from. They're all quite important things.
Yeah. It's so interesting that we've kind of gone in this roundabout. It's like we actually had it right, or we were doing a better job of it, like 20 years ago, in a sense. I'm sure there was many other ways we could improve, but the pyramid, there's been a huge argument that the food pyramid is completely off, but it almost sounds like it's not as off as we're all thinking. And sure, maybe like super sugary cereals and that kind of thing are like not the best choice, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like whole grains, whole food sources of like bread, pasta, potatoes, quinoa, rice. I mean, that the people listening to this know what's what. So
yeah,
that's really interesting.
And I think the thing is, unfortunately, carbs has got a bad press, right? Because if you think about things like sweets and sugary drinks and you know, cakes and pastries and things like that, like Not that there's anything wrong with eating any of these things, but it's very easy to overconsume these things, right? So if you think about, like, one of the biggest problems we have, especially in the UK, has been the intake of sugary drinks, because you don't even realize you're consuming the carbohydrate. You don't even realize that that's how much sugar is in a can of Coke, or in a can of Monster, or in a can of Red Bull, or whatever it might be. You don't even realize, right? And it's very easy to guzzle 3, 4 a day, and that's where the problem is, in the sense that that's where you get the overconsumption of calories. Really, it's not just the sugar, it's not just the carbohydrates. The overconsumption is so easy to consume that then is too much for what the body needs, and obviously then it is deposited as excess, right? Stored as excess. But when you eat things like pasta and rice and potatoes, and one of the reasons that, like, initially 20 years ago it was part of the pyramid and it was really important part of it, is because we knew these things actually filled us up and they made us feel full. And you couldn't eat loads because they make you feel full, And that's the other thing I find really interesting, is that because so many of the women I work with have avoided these foods for so long, when they start eating them, they're like, "God, I'm really bloated." It's like, well, you're not bloated. That's just normal, right? That's just what food's meant to do. It's meant to make you feel full. That's the whole point. But I think, again, we've lost sight of it. Complete lost sight of it. And we mustn't forget that when you have something like hypothalamic amenorrhea, most likely you have had low energy availability. There hasn't been enough energy in the system, which is why hypothalamic amenorrhea has occurred in the first place. So if there's not enough energy in the system, then it's going to start affecting other areas too, including your digestion. So your digestion does slow down. You do start to feel uncomfortable. You do get that, kind of IBS bloated type feeling, right? But that doesn't mean you have IBS. It just means that there's, what we call gastroparesis, is a very slow motility of food through the gut. And again, once you start to restore energy, you restore your health, you restore your hormones, then eventually your digestion also kicks back into place, and no longer do you have these problems.
Yes. The digestion piece is huge. And I was also going to touch on that when you brought up the vegetable consumption. Like, a lot of women, when they stop eating such a high volume of vegetables, because I've been there too, where it was like a whole head of cabbage or something, just to like get enough, just to feel full for at least a little while, but not eat as many calories. So a lot of women are experiencing discomfort in other ways, but I don't know, they're like used to it or something like that. And then they start to add in more simple, just more simple carbs that are more calorically dense and are from like grains and those like typical fear foods in quotations. And they experience more comfort, digestive comfort. They're not and they're very confused because they're just like, this isn't the message that I was told. And that's just so interesting to me. And do you see that a lot in athletes? You're like, they had this digestive issue and it's also gone away because they've actually moved away from this healthy eating obsession?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, no, 100%. In fact, I was with an athlete that I worked with yesterday, and actually he's a he, not a she, but it still actually had very bad RED, so low energy availability, and it had affected his hormones. But yeah, I mean, he'd been told all sorts of things before he started working with me. You've got IBS, you need to go on FODMAPs. You should never put somebody who is already restricting their intake and is already low in energy and low in weight on FODMAPs. That should never happen, ever. And anyway, we've been working together just not for a very long period of time, but a short period of time. And he's just like, he literally just said to me, "I've been everywhere. I've spoken to everybody, but you fixed my stomach." And I was like, well, no, I've just got you to restore your energy availability. You fixed your stomach. I didn't do anything. I just told you what to eat based on what you were doing training wise. And he just couldn't really, and honestly, it's been years and years that he has struggled. And so 100%, that's the thing which I find fascinating is, often, especially when it comes, this is sort of probably going a little bit off track, but especially when it comes to eating disorders specifically within sport, if we understand an eating disorder is, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way of denying uncomfortable feelings. It's a way of avoiding, those fears around criticism and not being good enough and abandonment and rejection and whatever else. All those horrible emotions that we don't want to experience because they're just really horrible. But we have to because it's life. But a lot of people don't want to, don't know how to. And so an eating disorder becomes a way of coping because you contain yourself within the realms of food and exercise and numbers, and that becomes a thing that you can fixate on and you can control to a certain degree because you don't want to experience other things. So what's often interesting is that athletes go down this path because they have this whole fear of not being enough. They go in pursuit of worth, and maybe they feel they can attain worth through body composition or through sporting achievement or whatever it might be. And this then ends up with them severely restricting and their relationship with food and exercise becoming more and more and more dysfunctional. Mm. So the whole reason they set out on this path was to be better, to be a better athlete, to perform better. But actually the path they choose means that they become, their performance deteriorates and often stagnates and then deteriorates completely, and they become more and more injured. So when you then finally start to get them to understand this, and you get them to help them to overcome the fear of rejection, the fear of failing, the fear of not being good enough, mm-hmm. and you get them to restore their energy availability, you get them to restore their weight if it's needed to be restored, and they start to see the benefits to their performance, and they're like, oh my God, like I recover better between sessions, and I can jump out of bed now, and I'm seeing, like, I was doing all this stuff in the gym and I wasn't seeing any changes to my body composition. In fact, if anything, I was a bit fluffy. And now I'm lean. And I can't believe I'm eating like 3 times the amount I was, but I'm leaner than I was. And it's like, yeah, hello, you need hormones to do all that.
Yes.
And when you don't have hormones, it doesn't do anything. So, yeah, it's always quite fascinating.
It's super fascinating. And I haven't talked about this a lot, because I don't know why. I just have like feelings about it, I guess. But for me, going into recovery, of course, super scary. What's going to happen to my body? What's going to happen to my identity? I'm going to like become a normal person. No. And it hasn't been the case. I got my period back at a much higher, I had a similar body fat percentage, but then I also had a much higher amount of muscle. I'm like significantly more muscular. Athletically, I'm just recovering so much faster. I am so much stronger and my mood is so much better. And I'm just like a more pleasant person. And the transformation has been incredible. And people do not expect it, and they don't think that can happen for them. But I have just seen how and I think I don't talk about it much because it brings a focus back to like your body and how you look. And that's kind of a big problem in the space. But the truth has been for me is that I have a much higher self-perception now. I don't know if it's real or if it's in my mind, but it doesn't matter. It's there. And how often do you see that happen?
Well, again, if we think about the role of estrogen and testosterone, estrogen and testosterone are neurotransmitters. They help the uptake of serotonin in the brain. So they make you feel good, right? That's something, again, important to remember. And we know this not just from the studies we've done on athletes and individuals, but also we know this from postmenopausal women. Because, one of the first symptoms when somebody is going through the menopause is that they start to become quite low in mood and highly anxious, and their cognitive function starts to deteriorate, and that's because their estrogen levels are dwindling and eventually they're not going to be very high at all. So we know that estrogen has a really big part to play in mood, and I always find that interesting as well. Like, so many of the people I work with are so low in mood, and they're usually on antidepressants, and it's kind of all, again, it's that kind of catch-22. They're low in mood probably because they've got low estrogen levels, but they've got low estrogen levels the low estrogen levels are caused by not eating enough, and that also affects mood and makes you. I mean, when you're hungry, you're miserable, right? Let's just face it. You're not happy at all. When you're hungry, you don't sleep, which means you don't recover, so you're not good at all. Like, fundamentally, hunger is not a good thing. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. And yet, for some people, they'd much rather have that uncomfortable feeling rather than the discomfort of not being good enough, or the discomfort of being a failure, or whatever it might be.
Well, they've like learned to associate that feeling of anxiousness or discomfort with like being on track and doing hard. Like, if I feel this way, if I feel hungry, I can like literally feel the fat melting off my body, and that equals a good thing. And you just have this weird association.
Yeah. And I think also there's an element of punishment there. I'm not worthy, so I will punish myself. It's complex, right? Eating disorders are complex. And there's similarly to HA, there's no one exact fit. Everybody's slightly different, and why they have an eating disorder, why they don't, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, your ability to think clearly is huge. You know, once you start to feed your brain, not only are you feeding it with estrogen and hormones, but you're also feeding it with energy. You're feeding it with glucose. You've got to remember the brain needs 120 to 130 grams of glucose a day to function appropriately, right? And in times of restriction, or if you are somebody who is doing keto and not providing your body with enough carbohydrate, then the body will have to compensate. And at its lowest, it will use 80 grams of glucose a day. But that is still compromised, which is why we can't think straight, which is why the neurotransmitters don't transmit. There's some MRI scans that I use of the brain when I do some talks, which show the brain of somebody healthy, the same person who is restricted, like has had anorexia type thing, and then when they're recovered. And you can see the changes in the brain. You can see the density of the neurons and the density of the white and gray matter in the normal, and then how that disappears when you're restricted, and then how it comes back, but might not always come back completely. But we don't know. Like, we know in adolescence it can, but we don't know if that later, if you go through starvation, restriction later, we don't know how quickly it will take for your brain to go back completely to normal. So I think that's the thing that's always complicated, is that there's the actual physical, structural issues that occur, but then there's also the kind of psychological aspects, the thoughts, the behaviors. And you put those two things together, and it is such a complex area to work in. And again, I go back to why I get frustrated when people think they know what they're talking about, because 20 years, so it's taken 20 years of really, really researching, understanding, looking at my clients, reflecting on my practice, going away and reading the research, doing more and more degrees and more courses to fully understand, discussing it with colleagues who are psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, you name it. Like, we have a proper network, you discuss these things, you understand it, and then you're in a position to kind of go, okay, yeah, I think I can help you. It's not just calories in, calories out. I wish it was, but it's not.
Yeah, totally. A lot of what I get the opportunity to do is refer people, because they come to me and they're like, help. And I'm like, whoa, I can't really, but, I've talked to all of these people now, and I feel like this person might be a good fit for you and that kind of thing. But I feel like, just for a lot of people listening kind of are in that health coach space, and they really do have the desire to help women with HA, and that's great. I feel like the best way that we can do that is pointing them in the direction of professionals and giving that sort of just like support. You're not alone. I understand you. And something that's just been successful for me has been sharing my story, because I felt for so long like I couldn't find another person with a similar one to me. And that was kind of it, right? Like that had the same kind of thought process. Like you were saying, eating disorders come in all kinds of different ways, and different people are having different are doing it for different reasons and afraid of different things. And so I feel like there's value there for people to share their story and let other people resonate and not feel alone. And then, yeah, we need to be like, this professional can test your body and help you.
100%, 100%. I definitely am 100% behind raising awareness, letting people realize it's not okay to not have a period, talking about what your experience was, because it may well resonate with someone. Like, I have no issue with that at all. I think it's brilliant. And I know, like, we do some group work in our clinic as well. Like, we have small groups that we work with together, and I know that the men and women that work in those groups find it really helpful to feel like they're part of something, you know, that they belong to something where people understand them and don't judge them, and don't, you know, again, it comes back to those fears, and they're in an environment where they're understood and they can say anything, no matter how silly it might seem to everybody else, but they can say it in that group and know that somebody else is going to get it. So I completely think the community spirit is so, so important. And that's one of the reasons we started Train Brave, is because, you know, we can't change the culture within sport quickly, but we can provide support, and we can provide a space where if people want to share their story and go, this was me, and it might prevent somebody else from going down that road. Like, that's the bit that I would love more, is that people hear your story, Dani, they hear other people's stories, and they go, oh my God, I can see myself going down this road, and they stop before it gets too far. Like, yes, that's the best thing, I think. I mean, I'm all for preventative medicine, not reactive medicine. And unfortunately, we seem to live in a world where we react rather than we prevent. And if we can prevent, you know, life would be a lot easier, and life would be a lot more fun, I think, as well.
Yeah. Why do we always have to be miserable first? Why can't we just skip that stage? Well, thank you for that. We have 4 more minutes. So okay. I'm going to really try and cram in this one of these last 2 questions. Which one will it be? Okay. When working with athletes and you're asking them to quit training or reduce training and to increase their energy intake, and asking them to do that immediately it's really hard. Like, asking them to basically go from 100 to 50% to 0, that's very challenging. What conversations and strategies might you take to get them on board with making this transition?
That's a good question. I guess it's a case of first building trust, because they have to engage in trust with you. So I think if you can always provide them with tangible data, that can help. Blood tests, we do the bones that we need to do to try and help them to see that actually they're not making it up. There is definitely something wrong. And then helping them to see the bigger picture and the kind of the longevity of the career, particularly, like, you know, do you want to be a one-hit wonder, or do you want to be in it for the next 10, 20 years? And then really helping them to understand how that's going to happen. How do you be sustainable? How do you have longevity in your career? And then it's looking at the barriers and the limiting beliefs that are keeping them in that place. Like, you know, why can't you do what I've asked you to do? What is stopping you? What's the underlying issue there? So it's kind of getting into the root of the problem. You know, like, why is it that you need to do the training that you're doing? Why is it that you need to have all these food rules? And then breaking those down one by one and helping them to question them. You know, is there any evidence that what you think is correct? If there's no evidence, then where's it come from? How do we change that for you? You know, so it's a long procedure. It's not a simple one. It's not like one that's fixed in one session. It's you know, several sessions and lots of discussions and lots of conversations and many emails back and forth usually. But when they engage and they can start to see how it impacts them and how it improves their performance, then they're going to trust that process.
Yeah, laying out the evidence, especially for this particular group of people is often very helpful. And one of the big things I come across a lot is like, I just don't know if that's going to work for me, or I don't know if that's really my problem. And a lot of people kind of arguing with themselves about what their real problem is. So sometimes, just being able to lay out like, well, I've done these tests and these are the facts, and you may now be released of wondering because this is true. And then now, let's just work through this story you have in your head of what this huge impact is going to be. You're going to gain insidious weight. You're going to lose your whole athletic career. And sometimes, like you were kind of saying, when you look at the long picture in the grand scheme of things, this is an investment. And when you look at those athletes that have gone on for a really long time with their career, like just Tom Brady, or those athletes that are in the sport for a long time, when you look at their self-care regime and how they do not drive themselves into a hole, that can be aspirational for people. But it's so interesting that we're not thinking of that. We really need help from someone else to help us see that. So that's cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. I cannot thank you enough for joining us on the show today. Where can people go? Where should they start to learn more about you guys and what you're doing over at Train Brave? So
I do a lot of my education is on my Instagram. So R_McGregor is my Instagram, and basically you will only really get education on there about all aspects of amenorrhea, REDS, how to feel properly, sports nutrition, you name it. That's what it's for. There's also quite a lot of information on my website, which is renemcgregor.com. And then with Train Brave is part of renemcgregor.com. So there's a whole section on the website about Train Brave. But we do have a separate Instagram account, which is train_brave. And again, we just put quite a lot of educational information on there. We also have the Train Brave podcast. So if anybody is just wanting a little bit more support, or just kind of feels like they want to learn more, then we talk a lot there about hypothalamic amenorrhea, how to train properly, how to come back from training when you've had hypothalamic amenorrhea, how to spot the signs, you name it, we cover it. We've also had loads of great guests on there as well. So there's lots of information on all those places without even having to book an appointment. So hopefully that will give people enough to start with.
Thank you so much for that.
No problem.
Thanks for listening today. And if you want to get involved in the conversation with me, with other amazing women, just like the ones that you hear on the show, I recommend you get on the waitlist for the HA Society. It opens on the new moon of every single month. So if you're not on the waitlist, go to the show notes or just head to waitlist.thehasociety.com or thehasociety.com or wherever you want to go and join on that waitlist. And whilst I have you here, I think it would be amazing if you left a review for this podcast. Rate and review the podcast. It helps give me clout, allows me to get more badass guests on the show, and helps other women just like you find the podcast more easily when they're searching around the internet or confused why they don't have a period, and it can help them find us in our little community that we have right here. Okay, I love you. Have a good one.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
Welcome back to the quickest podcast ever, brought to you by Kohl's.
Today's topic, fall style.
Wait, wasn't it just June?
Right? So I went to Kohl's.
Of course you did.
I got a cute Cara Santana for 9 West sweater for 25% off and a great pair of Vans.
Love Vans.
And save 25% on a Champion hoodie for my husband.
Ooh, sounds cozy.
You should go. You'll get 15% off or 15, 20, or even 30% off with a Kohl's card.
BRB.
Select styles. Offers end September 26th. Champion coupons do not apply. Some exclusions apply. See store or Kohls.com for details.